All right, Mark, your countdown. 3, 2, 1. You should be good to go.
So I should just carry on now. Is that should I do?
Yep, you got it.
All right. Uh, Welcome everybody. I have to say that I was eminently unprepared to give this webinar because it wasn't on my calendar, and thankfully somebody got a hold of me, and luckily I have been doing this for a while. So you're going to see a presentation that I gave to the Army War College, but on the topic of interest. So be aware that I did not build this specifically for you, but it's got the right materials in it anyway. So let me just kind of carry on here. Hopefully you can all see everything. Um, I'm not going to read through these kind of things, but I'm a professional historian and I design war games, and I published a book on it. Uh, I've done about 100 games to date. I did over 30 years in the Pentagon doing classified war games. And I also continued throughout that time to be a commercial war game designer. I've run a game publishing. So I've been around the block a few times. And as you can tell from my voice, I'm rather old. So you have to forgive me. Um, when you work in DoD Wargaming, this list here is the things that I did games on. Now, that's not to say that this list is all inclusive, but it is a compilation of what I have personally experienced. So you've got budget planning, war plans testing, those are always classified. Uh, Technology, I work for the DARPA Tactical Technology Office. Interagency coordination was always interesting, especially non-combatant evacuation, which is something right now I suspect is going on in the Middle East right now across a lot of American locations. So I worked in that area for many, many years. How to get American civilians out of combat zones quickly. Obviously, I worked on some very big defense program. I did evaluations of strategic missile defense, which goes back to the Reagan years. The B-2, which we affectionately call Save the Whale. And as you've seen, can be useful, although incredibly expensive. And then all the Title 10 responsibilities, War College, and then, of course, big, what they call path war games. We used to call it a bunch of guys sitting around a table, that kind of stuff. And so basically, you've got very common to have both manual and computer elements present in all these kind of endeavors over the years. I'm going to only hit these very quickly, but just give you a sense. When I was much younger, Reagan came into office, and he had this view that you could fight and win a nuclear war. I ran some war games on him, and I'm happy to say that that went away. Strategic defenses, they've actually gotten to the point now where they have some utility, but back then they were starting to hypothesize that defenses had to be perfect, otherwise you wouldn't build them. And then we started running some war games on it, and what was surprising is even a little defense goes a long way, and it changed the metric and the conversation. So again, how war games can change a conversation just by how you measure what success may or may not look like. And of course, proliferation, which is exactly what's going on. So if you think about my career, proliferation and non-combatant evacuation are playing literally as I'm speaking in another part of the world. So the thing that I have, so when I say this slide here is pretty much me and nobody agrees with me. So just to be clear, but I do believe that war games are about the human dimension of warfare. All else is commentary. This comes from this quote is from a friend of mine who's a professor at the Naval War College, probably still is, and I think about the thing that you cannot do in a computer model is understand the human decision process. You can tell the computer what you want it to do, but it's the human decision process where games play out. Modeling and simulation are different things. So, for instance, at the time, this goes well back before the Russia-Ukraine war, when it started, about obviously the most recent invasion, but the one that started under Obama. even before then, there was this debate going on, could 6 NATO brigades stop a Russian attack on the Baltic states, and which is still a relevant question, by the way. And a lot of the people in the program types and the war game types wanted to look at run matrices and computer models. And I said, that's not even the right question in this context. The question is that if Putin, he was in fact in charge at the time, if Putin wanted to invade the Baltic states and they saw the first NATO troop trying to get on a plane or bring in ships into those locations to bring in the 6 NATO brigades, if he was going to do anything about it, he'd do it immediately. He would never let the 6 brigades get there if he actually intended to attack. So the point is, it's the human process that's more important than the computer model, because if the 6 brigades get there, they'd stop the attack because it was never happening. If he doesn't get there, if we don't get there, then you know that he was very serious situation. And you're going to excuse me, Carol. Believe it or not, I'm giving a lecture online right now. That was my wife who did not know about this. Anyway, I just wanted to make sure she was aware that I'm rolling in here. So let's go back to the Gulf War of 1990-91. I don't know who's in this class and listening to this, but you were probably all born around here, I'm guessing, or not even yet. So if you for the highlight is on August 2nd, Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, and I ran a war game. Literally, the invasion was still going on. I actually knew about it because I got into the metro in Washington, and somebody held up their newspaper, and I went, "What?" And then I got a call from the Pentagon, and so. But what's critical about the war game is that what's in red there is we had 3 people playing it, but one of them, this woman, was a former ambassador to Iraq, and she actually knew Saddam Hussein. And so it was her input, again, that human dimension, that was critical to what we evaluated and what we wrote up, and we handed the report in that night. And pretty much everything that was in that war game turned out to be true. And the big question then is he going to continue the war, or how do we get him to back down so we can start to turn this around? And that report was a critical input literally less than 24 hours after the conflict began. DARPA. So when I think about what is a war game or any kind of simulation, whether it's computer or it's analog, is that there are 3 basic elements. You got graphics, you got interface, and simulation. Now, in a manual game, all these things, the graphics are a physical map. You've got some kind of tokens, pieces, whatever it might be to show the location of forces. And then you have the simulation, which can be various kinds of matrices and lookup tables and all that kind of stuff. What I was doing when I was working at DARPA was this game, Mech War 2, was a game I had done back in the day. And it was an armored combat game in Europe, which is again, this is during the Cold War. But what I was able to do is there's a place called the Ballistic Research Laboratories up at Aberdeen, Maryland, still there. And they had very detailed engineering level models. But the key part was, as the technologists were trying to invent or hypothesize new weapon systems for the Army, in this particular case, what we were able to do is take their ideas, put them into an analog game, use the computer model whenever, anytime anybody shot at somebody, with like an L7 rifle gun or whatever was the weapon that they had stuck on. It could be electromagnetic gun or whatever the characteristics were. They would play through various scenarios and talk about what they thought was working. And also we had military officers there, so you had military and scientists collaborating. And then they'd say, well, we'd like to see this again, but with these changes. Now, if it was a computer model totally, to change any of those things would have taken a period of time. In those days, it probably would have taken months. I was usually able to make the changes in about 15, 20 minutes, and then we could play it again. So again, the analog value of not having a computer involved in the graphics and the interface made a big difference in the timeline in which you could refresh the model and go at it again and learn some other things. So again, very effective technique in the scientific technology space. Now, I go back to a place called Simulations Publications Incorporated. I've been doing this since I got out of college in 1976. And my boss very eminent guy named Jim Dunnigan. He's written many books on warfare, and was a big guy on Wall Street for a while. And if you were to ask Jim how much realism and how much history would you need, do you know it has to be in a game? And this phrase is the direct quote. He would say literally, keep it simple, pause, smartly. So in other words, you want to put as much in as you need to put in to make your point. But if you overwhelm your model or your simulation or your game design too much with procedure and overhead and all that, you're gonna lose the audience and also lose the point. And so ultimately, you have to remember that all models are wrong, some are useful. And so whatever you're trying to do, you're trying to create something that's useful, it will definitely be wrong. And that's something to always remember. Also, don't turn the prototype should only take about a day. In fact, I just put 3 games into production literally over the last 3 weeks, and I was sitting around 3 days ago, and I said, "Well, what am I going to do next?" And there was a game that I had started on and talked about, and I literally put the prototype together in one day, and it's on a table behind me here. It's on the Roman Civil War, but the point is that you can build a prototype, start to mess around with it, see what it does, and then start to advance the product. And what I do is after I get a prototype, I will literally, again, I know how to use a computer and I know how to spreadsheets and all that, but I still prefer, even to this day, I get a piece of paper, I put a line down the middle, I write pros on the left, cons on the left, and I say, what do I like about my prototype? And I literally write it out. What do I like? And then I say on the con side, what don't I like? I write that down. And then the next question is, of the things that are cons, why were they in there in the first place? I mean, there was a reason why I must have thought that they belonged. And in some cases, like, yeah, it's a bad idea. In many cases, like, no, this is important, but I don't like the way I'm implementing it. And I try to figure out how to take it and move it through the systems that I do like in my prototype. And so to do that. And then the most important thing, and again, this is every designer does it differently. This is how I do it. But I also come from a very, I actually typed my first games on a manual typewriter. Okay, so just to understand that, and and so I don't think I have a game until I have written a full draft of, I have a full set of draft rules. And so if you're testing something and you go, I don't know, write out the rules. Even if the rules are very sketchy, write them down, because then you know what you're changing. Otherwise, you're almost like arguing. If you don't write it down, then you're arguing with yourself, not with what you want to improve. Uh, and then the other thing is you have to play it as much as possible. Now, when I put in this game recently, literally when I say recently, I mean like I put it in on last Thursday. It's called Army of the Potomac. It's a Civil War game, and I basically am still playing it, and I happen to like it, by the way. But the point is, if you don't want to play your own design, why will anyone else? And so, playing your game, if that's a chore, then it's not a good design. Not because it's not a good design. If you don't like it, why would anybody else? Is really the point. And then, of course, Dunnigan has another great phrase: "Is you're never going to be finished. It just gets published." So do the best you can. Get something that's workable, that gets you where you want to go. And after you get it published, or you at least get prototype versions out in people's hands, you'll start to see all the things you could do better at. And, sometimes you get a second or third edition try at all that. So I look at design as having 2 dimensions. There's kinetic factors. So in other words, you're abstracting reality. So right now, if you were doing, let's just talk about, the plan to, let's just talk about the Israeli-Iran thing that's going on right now. So Iran fires a bunch of ballistic missiles at Israel. Israel has various air defense, the Arrow and the Iron Dome and all this stuff. And all of that is playing out as so if you built a model of all that, you would have, assigned probabilities, what's getting hit and all that. And what you would find is some missiles will get through, and that's what's happening. But you also should understand what paradigms you are explicitly using or not using. And so understand all of those pieces as you abstract that reality. And then, of course, sometimes, like if you had built a model, and I have built models of this kind of situation before when I was in the Pentagon, what's happening is not even, it's, we understood this problem. That's all I can say. The systems have gotten better, but they're never going to be perfect, and you can't overwhelm a system. You know, a rocket system will run out of shots, and some of these things are maneuvering, so it gets very complicated. But some things are getting through, but about what we would have expected. You know, 5 to 10% are going to slip through the net. And what you're hoping for is the 5 to 10% that are slipping through the net are going to hit something that you don't care about, like out in the desert. You just don't shoot at those. But again, there's a lot going on here. You also have to understand, you know, what is the scale you game? Are you doing a strategic game, operational, grand tactical, the components? What are the players looking at? What do they touch? And granularity, what moves and what does not take attrition mean? So you have to understand, like, is the smallest unit in my game a person? Is it a battalion? Is it a division? Is it an army group? I mean, you have to understand that. And you have to understand what's getting calculated. And of course, never forget about terrain, weather, all the things that actually matter in real life. You know, as I'm doing this game on the Army of Potomac in the Civil War, even like in fact today, I don't think it stopped raining here in New York in for much in the last 3 weeks. And if you were a soldier, whether it's today a soldier or then a soldier, if you're marching around in the rain, it's not as much fun as if it's a nice day. So again, things slow down in weather, and so weather does matter, and terrain matters, and mud matters. These are things that you have to consider in the science of design, because you can calculate these things, you can get data on these things, you can examine these things to some, you can base it on other real work. Now, the art of design is what I call psychological factors. You know, what are you going to give the player aid? Who is the player to begin with? Are you a company commander, or president of the United States, or anything in between? Uh, what does the player have agency over? What decisions can they directly or indirectly control? If there's a boss, what decisions are imposed on participants? So if you were looking at a right now, CENTCOM is very involved in whatever support we're doing for Israel and dealing with the Middle East. It's going to be CENTCOM, Central Command, and but the Central Commander is not the President of the United States, and he's not the Corps Commander. So there are decisions that are imposed on CENTCOM by high, the Secretary of Defense, et cetera. And then there's things that they control. And so you have to understand, those things. And also you have to understand what great decisions are the players prohibited from making. Because in other words, you can't make policy if you're a CENTCOM commander. You can do a lot, but you can't make, and also you must create the probability for innovation without anarchy. That's not so simple. It takes a little bit of skill, but the point is you want the players to be able to think of interesting things to do, but within a construct that's reasonable, but they can't, do crazy things that are not realistic or are outside the realm of what would even be possible in some regards. So again, the science of design, the art of design. So one of the 3 games I just put into production is this one, Defiant Second Russo-Ukrainian War. And for me, I wanted to do this game because it's the first draft of history. It's accurate but not precise. We have pretty good information. We actually got through a source, old boss of mine, who he got it from the Ukrainians. We actually had the Soviet initial war plan, and we know where all the forces were, and so we actually have some pretty good data, better than what you're seeing in newspapers or in books even. But what you start to learn is, when you play the game, you start to relearn lessons in what I call what is old is new again. I'll only hit on 2 of them, but they're in red here. But war stocks, you got to have a lot of ammunition. On a given day in this war, especially in the beginning, between Russia and Ukrainians, they were shooting about 20,000 artillery shells a day. So 12,000 for the Russians, about 8,000 for the Ukrainians. And the United States at that time, maybe we make, maybe we make 1,000 shells a month in that time of the 155 shells, maybe. Now we built new plants since then, but think about it. If your ally is shooting 8,000 a day and you're making 1,000 a month, that math doesn't work. And so that was true even in World War One, where in 1914 they shot up all their ammunition. If you look at any history, 1915 was kind of quiet relative to 1914, and in 1916 you get the Somme and Verdun when they now have made new artillery shells. So stuff matters. And the other thing is the danger of man-portable systems, which in now includes drones. And so the lethality of small units against what would be traditionally tanks and armored vehicles and aircraft and air defenses has become such that nobody's flying planes. Only the Israelis seem to have figured out how to fly planes over the Iranian battle space, but it's dangerous when the other side has really good air defenses. Again, these are just elements of design. I'll let you read. I'll give these slides to Sebastian, and you can have them to use. So I won't read them all, but basically, these are the kinetic systems and how they're represented in Defiance. The psychological system. One of the things that's important, and I'll be giving a speech about this in London in September, is that human factors matter: morale, psychological systems, political systems, information systems. What I mean information, I mean the how the public sees what's going on. All those things are important, and even what is victory in the modern world. In this particular game, there is no winner in the game that I'm doing. Defiance only covers the first 3 months of what's coming toward the 3.5 year anniversary of the war. At that time, obviously, there's no winner. Even if Kyiv had fallen, the Ukrainian government just would have displaced west somewhere and would have kept going. So again, the government would not have surrendered. So again, you have to understand all these dimensions when you're doing a war game. Now, back in the day, I did a war game for CNA, and it was given out to the educational institutions. And I know for a fact Sebastian, because he's at CNA, has a copy of this game. He tells me it's really not very good, but hey, it's just his opinion. But anyway, it does cover a potential war in the South China Sea between China going after Taiwan and the U.S. trying to stop them. Again, this is actually the map from the game. You'll see the base structures that are on there. Now, one of the tricks that I found to be very effective is the game's intent was to teach. It was an educational game. It was designed for military education. So every game has to have a purpose. Is a game to evaluate strategy, whatever. And the game was supposed to educate military people and policymakers what were the Chinese capabilities to stop what they call their area denial defense systems throughout this area. And so one of the best tricks, which is the last bullet, the solitaire mode, I created a solitaire system where the player was China and the solitaire system was the United States. So I have the United States filing a pre-file plan, and the player alone, and I found with generals and policymakers, they don't want to be embarrassed in public. They could play on their own, and they got to manipulate the powers of China. They already know the U.S. So, and it was very effective. I actually got rules questions from the Deputy Secretary of Defense, and they were good questions. So the man had definitely played the game. Challenges. One of the things that gets lost. I've been in a lot of Pentagon war games on Taiwan over the years. The thing you find out is that they tend to look at the first week of the war, and what you find out is ammunition is everything. You run out of missiles pretty damn quick, and so the game specifically has a design that lets you telescope into like a week of conflict, and then it lets you telescope back out to you can now go 2-3 months of time with certain things happening while you're trying to bring up ammunition and deploy forces overseas, because that takes months. If you look at the Gulf War, which I was very much a Washington Pentagon participant in support of, August is when the invasion of Kuwait occurred, and the invasion didn't come until it was like January, somewhere late January. So all those months, it was quiet. I mean, there was some shooting and some things going on, but it wasn't a lot going on because we were just sending people overseas, and you have to be able to build that. That was built into this particular simulation based on a real world experience. You also have to recognize that there's an edge of the world factor. At some point, there's an edge to your battle space, and you have to account for what's happening in the U.S. homeland, lines of communication to the theater. Space is a big deal. And as noted, nuclear arsenals are noted but not usable, which is what I think the current situation in Iran is, to make sure they don't have a nuclear arsenal that is usable, and so on and so forth. So again, the edge of the world, kinetic factors, the geography. Geography is still very, very important in today's world. I won't go through this in any detail, but this diagram has been confirmed. This is a printout of a PRC war game of some kind. I don't read Chinese, but I did give it to a good friend who is a CIA Chinese translator, and I have seen the translation of it, and it is from the analysis, the dialect and the writing style is Chinese, not Taiwanese. And so the fact is, this is not just a US thing. This is being done all the time. I will try to close out here and we can take some questions. Again, what's useful? Rapid prototyping is essential if you're going to be a designer. An idea that I've had for years that nobody's ever taken me up on is using tournaments, organized play to develop your design quickly is a useful thing. Playtesting, we call it. But I think competitive tournaments really rings out the design when there's you give out prizes. I mean, when I mean giving out a prize, I mean, you get a coffee mug. One of the challenges always when you're dealing with the military is player training is uneven and difficult without interest. A lot of people get dragged into these things. They have other jobs, and this is a other duty as assigned. And in many cases, just getting them to participate and really bring their full capabilities to the place is sometimes a great challenge. And there is a huge misplaced belief in the verisimilitude of computer simulations. They just hide what they're doing. So with that, Morgan, I can take questions at this point. I tried to get us back on schedule, given that I took us off schedule. And over to you.
I do appreciate the speedy presentation. I did have one question for you. You mentioned the human dimension towards the beginning of your presentation, and that a lot of people, I guess there was some disagreement on your opinion on that. Could you speak more to what that disagreement was?
Yeah. So the disagreement is, does a war game, an analog war game, or a war game with humans involved? So if you do let me go back this way. If you have a computer simulation, if you're going to have in science, and you have variables, if you want to have controls and you want to change one variable, you have something called a run matrix. So in other words, we're going to play it with scenario A. Scenario B is exactly like scenario A, but just with a little bit of a tweak on something, and so on and so forth. So they create these run matrices, and that's how they look at a computer simulation, which is very appropriate for computer simulation. But now when they look at a war game, they want to put the war game through the same process when it's not, after you've done the war game once or twice, you've gotten out of it what the human factors are and how to portray that. So the point is that you cannot look at a war game as just a computer simulation with humans in it. They're different. They're not the same, and you have to treat them differently. And when you treat them the same, you lose the point. And it's an area that RAND Corporation and I have disagreed on for about 35 years.
Thank you for that. And kind of in line with the human dimension, I wanted to ask, how do you model psychological symptoms? Like you mentioned morale, or sorry, systems, not symptoms. You mentioned morale as an example in a war game. So I was curious about that.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I'm going to use pilots for a second because there are measurables. Sort of how much training has somebody had makes them better the first time they're actually getting shot at. So for example, Russian soldiers that are going to the front in Ukraine are getting 4 weeks of training. 4 weeks of training, you might figure out how to point a rifle in direction, shoot it, and all the skill craft of an infantryman cannot be given to a human being in 4 weeks. That's just the U.S. military has never had less than an 8-week training program. In World War II, the United States was running short of second lieutenants because they were always getting killed, and so they had what they called 90-day wonders. The reason they were called 90-day wonders is they took somebody, said, okay, you're going to be a lieutenant. They gave him 90 days of training and put him in the front. And second lieutenants in the United States Army had an attrition rate more than 100%. That means people were getting, if they weren't killed, they were wounded to send them back after they healed. So to give you a sense of training time. In pilots, in North Korea, again, this is old data. This goes back, long ago. The North Korean Air Force pilots flew their planes about 30 hours per year. A typical US pilot flies their plane about 30 hours per month, or actually more like 45 hours per month, depending on the circumstances. So when you look at skill and and morale and all those things, training is a critical dimension of it. How experienced are the NCOs? Are the NCOs no better off than, or are they old-time veterans who have been in combat or know their job, have been doing it for 20 years? Those are the things that you want to measure, because it's the human, there's just no sense, like, even in athletics, somebody, even if somebody's got a lot of natural skill, you still have to train. So it's that notion of human skill can be measured. Morale tends to be that and other things based on the circumstance of the combat, but you always start with the humans and what they're capable of, just like you would anything. But I think training time and proficiency is a good place to start.
All right, interesting. Thank you for that. We do have a few questions popping up in the chat here as well.
Okay.
First one says, looking ahead, do you think that your approach that has yielded such rapid results for decision makers is amenable to generative AI and other automation? Or do you think the manual method you use is really the future?
You know, so you need to think of me as a dinosaur talking to mammals right now. So I have just I have a bunch of friends, in my generation who are just getting all enamored with AI, and I'm looking at it, but I have no, you know, I have a friend who's an expert in neural networks, so he understands AI at a quantum level. There are things what the AI doesn't have is creativity typically, but if there's a rule set or a context and you just give it like ridiculous amounts of information that it's trained on, it's going to be a great support system. But whether it could actually someday be sentient, where it can actually create new content beyond what it's being asked for, I don't know. That's I keep asking certain simple questions with maps that I'd like to have done, and they tell me, oh, AI can't do that. So obviously it's not usable by me right now. Whether it's going to get better, or if you have much more, your computer skills are more of a much younger generation who've been around it longer and understand it, who knows? But I don't have a good opinion, given that I don't really understand AI that well.
All right, next question from the chat says, hi, Mark, you're semi-retired. However, any thoughts on developing a modern joint warfare design at a level of warfare similar to your Gulf or Aegean strike or your Pacific strategic designs?
Oh, well, I want to just, I, I guess semi-retired. I am self-employed, just for the record. I put in last week about 60 hours working on Wargame, so I don't think I don't think I worked that much when I was working. But anyway, all that aside, there is a game. There's a German company called VUCA, VUCA Simulations, who I'm working with a guy named Yves Rattel, and so Gulf Strike's being redone in a more modern context of like today. Um, but if somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, would you want to do this?" Defiance is really the thing that I'm interested in, is looking at, what are the simulating modern conflict is something I'm already doing. So Defiance is my answer to your question. And I think that it's going to be an eye opener when it gets out there. It's already in, like I said, it's in final production right now.
All right, thank you. Next one says, do you have any thoughts or insights on modeling functions that are not associated with kinetic outcomes? For example, ISR success in and of itself without actual kinetic connection. For example, sorry, the chat just moved. Could you conceive of this being fun? I keep stumbling on the fun part in spite of intellectual curiosity.
Can you just read that question again? I'm trying to understand what the question is exactly.
Yeah. Are you able to see it in the chat? I don't know if the visual would.
Oh, is there a chat button I should be hitting or something?
If you there should be a chat button. It might, if you unshare your screen, you should be able to see it.
Oh wait, yeah, I see a button. Hang on.
Perfect.
Oh, there it is. Look at that. I got it in
Awesome.
or is it, do you have any? Oh, here we go. Thanks. That'll make it a little easier.
Yeah, no worries.
I'll make it bigger so I can even read it. Oh, absolutely. I mean, so we've been modeling that for forever. I mean, so uh, knowing so the reality is in the modern world, and it's getting if somebody moves around on the battlefield or anything happens, you know about it pretty quickly. The ability to hide has gone not away entirely. That's why things happen at night or quickly or whatever, or diversionary. But yes, the decision makers knowing where the enemy is and how you're going to deal with them is absolutely critical to. Uh, and that's not. I mean, whether you shoot at them or not, knowing where they are is a big deal in how you maneuver against them. Molly, what does modeling ideational variables mean exactly? Mean ideas? Oh yeah, that's he's talking about ideas. So I worked on so the way I answer this is long time ago I used to be part of the Office of Secretary of Defense used to have a summer study. I was in it for like about 20 years, and they looked at irrational. The question on the table was, how do you deal with irrational actors, which is kind of an ideational construct, religion and all that. And the conclusion of that, I wasn't in that particular group, but I saw the brief out. Their conclusion was that nobody, leaders and effective leaders are not ever irrational. They are rational, but they have a different basis for their rationality. So, for instance, when it comes to religion, there's a term called eschatological. Somebody who has an eschatological view of the world is more about the afterlife. This is the all the benefits that come to you if you die as a holy warrior kind of stuff. I won't go into what they promise. And and if your view was that dying, the real reward comes in dying, then your rationality and your decision set is different than somebody who is not trying to get killed and accomplish their mission. So again, that has also been modeled and it can be modeled, but again, this goes back to wargaming based on the human dimension and not what a computer model would tell you. Because that's, you can come up with a hypothesis, but you need to actually have that thought process brought in at the human level in a war game to see what its impact may or may not be.
I do have one more question that was directly sent to me. It asks, setting aside AI applications, what areas of wargaming design will we be talking about in 5 years?
Say that one more time. I'm
Setting
trying.
aside AI applications, what areas of wargaming design will we be talking about in 5 years?
Well, so so if you think about, what's been the big, the obvious revelation. Let me start with this. All right. So just remember, I'm a historian, so I'm going to start. This is going to be a little bit of a long answer, but I think it'll be at least of some amusement to the audience. So long ago, there was this crowd called Genghis Khan and the Mongols. And what Genghis Khan and the Mongols used to do to practice warfare is they used to go hunting. I mean, when the whole army went hunting to a place, and they would use their forces to maneuver the animals in this like preserve, the deer and the elk or whatever the heck they were hunting, and they would move them by maneuvering and would force the animals into a kill zone, and then they'd shoot them with a lot of arrows, and then they'd have a big dinner. They used the exact same tactics when they fought the Christian knights in Europe. They literally maneuvered them around just like they were animals, and they got them into a kill zone and they shot them to pieces at a place called Leipzig. Um, the reason I bring that up is I'm sure everybody has seen these incredible drone displays where there's a flying dragon and it's all drones with lights and the drones are all coordinating and flying around and it's just really spectacular to see. What you are seeing is a Mongol hunt in the modern world. So autonomous vehicles coordinated like that with, obviously lots of different capabilities is what's coming. And and they're just going to get better at it. The Chinese just claim, what did they say? The Chinese claim they can make 2 million. The Ukrainians said they can make 2 million drones now a year. The Chinese claim they can make basically 800,000 to a million drones a month. So this is like a new industrial capability, and they're not selling them all on at Walmart. So again, when you start to look at the future, it's going to be this, it's going to be so dangerous to be on the battle space. There's not going to be a lot of people out there, but and also this mistaken view that the blitz of the bombing cities does not make people surrender. It never did in the past. It never will in the future. But that's still back in vogue, as you can see in the Ukraine war. And again, we're precision. When you're aiming at hospitals, it's you can terrorize people, but you also just piss them off. So anyway, there's your future for you. And what's going on between Iran and Israel is part of that future, and it's what's been going on in Ukraine and Russia for the last almost 4 years.
All right, those are all of the questions that we have. So I'll go ahead and hit stop recording in just a second here. But just wanted to thank you, Mark, for your time. And I think we're all wrapped up here. And thank you, everybody, for joining today.
Yeah, and sorry I was late, but Sebastian should have given me at least a little bit of a warning.
You should have confirmed. Well, this is all Sebastian's fault. That's what I'm hearing.
That's why I was Sebastian. That's what everybody should do. All right. Stop sharing my screen.
All right.